The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty road leading out of Winnetka, Nevada. When Barnaby Kane first heard the story about the woman who lived alone at the edge of town with nothing but thousands of bees for company. The year was 1873, and he had just arrived after 3 months of trapping in the mountains, his pack horse laden with furs and his stomach growling for something other than dried meat, and whatever he could shoot along the trail. The locals at the general store had fallen quiet when he asked about where he might find fresh honey, their eyes darting nervously to one another before the storekeeper finally spoke up in a hushed voice. "You can get honey from her, I suppose, though most folks stay clear of that place. Woman lives about 2 miles north, past the old Miller property. But I warn you, stranger, those bees of hers are not like normal bees. They swarm something fierce, and she has got a way about her that makes the children run the other direction when they see her coming." Barnaby had simply nodded, paid for his supplies, and set off in the direction indicated. He was not a man easily frightened. At 26 years old, he had survived winters in the mountains that would have killed lesser men, fought off a grizzly bear with nothing but his hunting knife, and crossed territories where outlaws and hostile tribes made life precarious at best. Standing well over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders thick with muscle from years of hard living, his sun-darkened skin and shoulder-length brown hair gave him the appearance of someone more comfortable in the wilderness than civilization. The townspeople had given him a wide berth when he walked through their streets, which suited him just fine. As he approached the property described to him, Barnaby noticed the distinctive hum before he saw the hives. It was a sound that filled the air like a living thing, rising and falling in waves. The small house sat in a clearing surrounded by wildflowers that seemed impossibly vibrant compared to the scrubby desert vegetation that dominated the rest of the landscape. Rows of white boxes stood in neat formation, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with the movement of thousands of bees going about their work. He dismounted and tied his horse to a fence post, noting how the animal remained calm despite the insects buzzing all around. As he walked toward the house, a figure emerged from behind one of the hives. She wore a wide-brimmed hat with netting draped around it, thick gloves, and a long dress that covered every inch of her skin. Even through the protective gear, he could see she moved with purpose and confidence, handling the frames of honeycomb with practiced ease. "You are either very brave or very foolish," she called out without looking directly at him. Her voice was clear and strong, not frightened or hostile, simply stating a fact. "Most people do not come this close." "I am looking for honey," Barnaby replied, stopping a respectful distance away. "The man at the store said you might sell some." She carefully placed the frame back into the hive and closed it, then turned to face him. Through the netting, he could make out dark eyes studying him with obvious curiosity. "You do not seem afraid." "Should I be? The children think so. Their mothers tell them to stay away from the bee woman." There was no bitterness in her voice, just resignation. "Even grown men cross the street when they see me in town." Barnaby glanced around at the industrious insects flying past him, landing briefly on his shirt before moving on to more interesting flowers. "They are just bees. They do their work, and if you do not bother them, they do not bother you." The woman laughed, a sound so unexpected and genuine that it made him smile in return. "You have more sense than most of the town, then." She pulled off her gloves and began removing the netted hat. "Wait there. I will get you some honey." When she finally revealed her face, Barnaby felt something shift in his chest. She was perhaps 23 or 24, with rich brown hair pulled back in a practical braid and skin that had seen plenty of sun. Her features were striking rather than conventionally pretty, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw that suggested determination. But it was her eyes that held him, dark and intelligent, carrying both sadness and strength in their depths. "How much do you need?" she asked. "However much you are willing to sell. I have been eating trail food for 3 months, and I would pay well for something sweet." She nodded and disappeared into the small house, returning a few minutes later without her protective clothing, carrying 2 large jars of golden honey. Her dress was simple calico, worn but clean, and he noticed old scars on her hands and forearms, the kind that came from countless stings over time. "Most people do not build up tolerance," she said, catching his gaze. "But I have been doing this since I was a girl. My father was a beekeeper back in Missouri. When he died, I came west with my aunt and uncle. They are gone now, too. You run this place alone. For 2 years now. The bees do not judge and they do not gossip. It is more than I can say for most people." She held out the jars. "These are yours if you want them." Barnaby reached for his coins, but she shook her head. "Not yet. First, you taste. If you do not like it, I do not want your money." He opened one of the jars, dipped his finger in, and brought it to his mouth. The honey was unlike anything he had tasted before, complex and rich, with floral notes that seemed to dance on his tongue. It was sweet, but not cloying, with a depth of flavor that spoke to the wildflowers blooming all around them. "This is the best honey I have ever had," he said honestly. A smile flickered across her face, transforming it entirely. "That is because the bees gather from plants that grow nowhere else. This land may look harsh, but there is beauty in it if you know where to look." "What is your name?" he asked. Hannah Collins. Barnaby Kane." "People call me Bear, mostly." "That fits you," she said, looking him up and down without any trace of flirtation, simply assessing him the way she might assess one of her hives. "You have the look of someone who belongs in wild places." He paid her twice what she asked for, ignoring her protests. "Quality deserves to be compensated fairly. Besides, I will be back for more before I head into the mountains again." "When will that be?" "A month, maybe 2. Depends on how long my supplies hold out and whether I can stand being around people that long." He smiled to show he was partly joking. Hannah laughed again. "I understand that feeling." As Barnaby rode back to town, he found himself thinking not about the honey in his saddlebags, but about the woman who made it. There was something compelling about her self-sufficiency, the way she had carved out a life for herself, despite the fear and suspicion of others. He had spent years living on the edges of society himself, and he recognized a kindred spirit when he saw one. Over the following weeks, he found excuses to ride out to her property. Sometimes he brought meat from his hunting, claiming he had more than he could use before it spoiled. Other times he simply showed up with his tools and asked if anything needed fixing. Hannah accepted his help with a practical gratitude that never felt like obligation. She fed him meals that were simple but delicious, and they talked about everything from beekeeping to the best routes through the mountain passes. One evening, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Hannah finally asked the question he had been expecting. "Why do you keep coming back here, Bear? You have been in town for 6 weeks now, and everyone knows you usually head back to the mountains within a fortnight." He was silent for a moment, watching a bee make its final trip of the day back to the hive. "I suppose I am trying to figure something out." "What?" "Whether a man like me could ever fit into a life like this." Hannah turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. "What kind of life is that? One with roots, with someone to come home to?" He met her eyes steadily. "I have spent my whole life moving, never staying anywhere long enough to matter. But lately, I have been wondering if maybe I have been running from something instead of towards something." "And what brings you to my doorstep specifically?" You do not pretend to be anything you are not. You do not expect me to be anything I am not. When I am here, I feel like I can breathe." He paused. "And if I am being honest, I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the first day I saw you." Hannah was quiet for so long that he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake in speaking so plainly. But then she reached over and placed her hand on his, her scarred fingers warm against his weathered skin. "The children are afraid to come near me," she said softly. "Their parents tell them stories about the witch who lives with the Bays. Men in town look through me like I am not there, or worse, they look at me like I am something to be pitied or feared. You are the first person in 2 years who has treated me like I am just a woman making her way in the world." "You are not just anything, Hannah. You are remarkable," she smiled, and this time there was something new in her expression, a tentative hope. "I have been alone for a long time, Bear. I am not sure I remember how to be any other way. Then maybe we can figure it out together." As the darkness settled around them, and the last bees returned to their hives for the night, Barnaby felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of what he wanted from life. The mountains would always be there, but this woman, this moment, was something rare and precious. The next morning, he woke before dawn and rode into town with a specific purpose. The jeweler looked at him suspiciously when he asked to see rings, but Barnaby's money was as good as anyone else's, and business was business. He chose a simple gold band with a small garnet set into it, the deep red stone reminding him of sunset over the desert. But he did not give it to her right away. He was not a fool, despite what some might think of a man who spent most of his time alone in the wilderness. Hannah had been hurt by the world, pushed to the edges of a society that should have welcomed her skills and strength. She needed time to trust that his feelings were genuine, that he was not going to disappear like morning mist when something better came along. Instead, he continued his daily visits, bringing firewood before she asked, repairing the fence that kept deer away from her garden, helping her add 3 new hives to accommodate swarms she had captured. They worked together in comfortable silence punctuated by conversation, and slowly he watched her walls come down. One afternoon, while they were collecting honey together, a group of children appeared at the edge of her property. They stood in a tight cluster, daring each other to come closer, their voices carrying on the wind. "She is the bee witch," one boy said loudly. "My ma says she will set the bees on anyone who bothers her." Hannah's shoulders stiffened, but she continued her work, pretending not to hear. Barnaby, however, set down the frame he was holding and walked toward the children. They scattered like startled quail, but he called out in a voice that was firm but not threatening, "Hold on there. I want to tell you something." The children stopped, curiosity overcoming their fear. They ranged in age from about 6 to maybe 12, all of them dusty and sun-browned the way children got in this part of the world. "There is no witch here," Barnaby said. "Just a woman who works harder than most men I know. Those bees you are so afraid of. They make the honey that your mothers buy in town, the same honey that goes in your biscuits and tea. And Miss Collins there, she knows more about the land and what grows on it than anyone for 100 miles. But the bees sting," a little girl said, her voice trembling. "They do if you bother them, same as any animal will protect itself if threatened. But if you are calm and respectful, they will leave you be. Want me to show you?" He glanced back at Hannah, who had stopped working entirely and was watching with an expression he could not quite read. She gave a small nod. "Come on then," slowly and quietly. To his surprise, all 5 children followed him back toward the hives. Hannah met them halfway, and though she looked uncertain, she knelt down to their level. "Have any of you ever seen a bee up close?" she asked. They shook their heads. She pointed to a flower near her feet where a fat bumblebee was gathering pollen, its legs thick with golden powder. "Watch this one. See how it moves from flower to flower. It is not interested in us at all. It has work to do." The children crept closer, fascinated despite their fear. Hannah began to talk about how bees communicate, how they build their hives, how they work together for the good of the whole colony. Her voice was gentle and patient, so different from the reserved woman she became in town. "Why do people say you are scary?" the oldest boy asked suddenly. Hannah looked at him for a long moment. "Because people fear what they do not understand. I am different from other women in town. I do not attend socials or go to church on Sunday. I live out here alone with my bees. That makes some people uncomfortable." "I think it is interesting," the little girl said. "I wish I could work with bees." "Then you are welcome to visit and learn," Hannah replied. "With your parents' permission, of course." The children left shortly after, chattering excitedly about everything they had seen. As they disappeared down the road, Hannah turned to Barnaby with tears glistening in her eyes. "Why did you do that?" she whispered. "Because they needed to see you for who you really are, and you needed to see that not everyone in the world will reject you." She walked into his arms then, and he held her while she cried. It was not loud or dramatic, just a quiet release of years of loneliness and hurt. When she finally pulled back, she looked up at him with such raw emotion that he nearly kissed her right then. But he held back, sensing she was not quite ready. "I think I am falling in love with you," she said quietly, "and that terrifies me." "Why?" "Because everyone I have ever loved has left me. My mother died when I was young. My father died 4 years ago. My aunt and uncle brought me here and then died in a typhoid outbreak. I am afraid that if I let myself love you, you will disappear too." Barnaby cupped her face in his large, calloused hands. "I cannot promise that nothing will ever happen to me. Life is uncertain, especially out here. But I can promise that I will not leave you by choice. I can promise that every day I am given I will choose you. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you are strong and smart and kind. I know you have built a life from nothing and survived when others would have given up. I know that when I am with you, I feel like I have finally found the place I am supposed to be." He paused. "And I know that I want to spend the rest of my life learning everything else there is to know about you." Hannah searched his face, looking for any hint of deception or doubt. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she rose on her toes and kissed him. It was tentative at first, questioning, but when he responded with gentle fervor, she melted against him. He was intensely aware of how small she felt in his arms despite her strength, how perfectly she fit against his chest. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she smiled. "I think I would like that very much." Over the next few weeks, their relationship deepened. Barnaby moved his things from the boarding house to Hannah's property, setting up his gear in the small barn she used for storage. They established a rhythm to their days, working together on the hives and the garden, taking turns cooking meals, sitting together in the evenings while she mended clothes, and he carved small wooden figures from scraps of pine. The children began to visit regularly, always in groups, and Hannah taught them about bees and flowers and the delicate balance of nature. Their parents remained suspicious at first, but when the children came home safe and excited about what they had learned, some of the mothers began to nod politely to Hannah when they encountered her in town. It was not a complete transformation. There were still those who whispered behind their hands, who warned their children away, who saw Hannah as something strange and unsettling. But the wall of isolation that had surrounded her began to develop cracks, and light poured through. One evening in early September, as the heat of summer began to ease into autumn, Barnaby finally pulled out the ring he had been carrying for nearly 2 months. "Hannah Collins, I am not good at fancy words or romantic gestures. I have spent most of my life alone, and I do not know all the proper ways to do things. But I know that I love you with everything I am. I know that I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to help you with your bees and watch you teach the children and grow old together in this place you have made beautiful through sheer force of will. He opened the small box, revealing the ring inside. Will you marry me? Hannah's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Bear, I had no idea you were thinking of marriage. I have been thinking about it since the day I met you. I just needed to be sure you felt the same way. I do, she breathed. God help me, I do, but are you certain? Marriage is not something to enter into lightly, and I am not an easy woman to love. Neither am I. I am rough and set in my ways. I have spent years living by my own rules with no one to answer to. I can be stubborn and silent, and I am sure I will drive you to distraction more than once. He smiled. But we will figure it out together, just like we have figured out everything else. She held out her hand, trembling slightly, and he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the garnet glowing warmly in the lamplight. When? She asked. Whenever you want. Tomorrow, next month, next year. I am not going anywhere. Hannah looked down at the ring, turning her hand to watch the stone catch the light. I want to do it soon. I do not want to wait any longer than we have to. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Winnetka. Barnaby had worried that no one would attend, that Hannah's isolation would mean they stood alone before the minister. But to his surprise, nearly 20 people showed up, including all of the children who had been visiting Hannah to learn about bees, along with several of their parents. The blacksmith came, as did the storekeeper and his wife. It was not a full church by any means, but it was enough to show that attitudes were slowly changing. Hannah wore a new dress she had made herself, simple blue cotton with white lace at the collar and cuffs. She had pinned her hair up with flowers from her garden, and when she walked down the aisle toward him, Barnaby felt his throat tighten with emotion. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional prettiness, and everything to do with strength and grace and authenticity. The ceremony was brief. The minister, an elderly man who had seen countless couples through this ritual, spoke about partnership and commitment, about building a life together based on respect and love. When it came time for vows, Barnaby spoke as clearly, his deep voice carrying through the small space. I vow to stand beside you in all things, to support your dreams and share your burdens. I vow to be honest with you, even when the truth is difficult. I vow to choose you every day for as long as I draw breath. Hannah's voice shook slightly as she repeated similar promises, but her eyes never left his face. I vow to trust you with my heart, even though that terrifies me. I vow to build a home with you, a place of safety and love. I vow to believe in us, even when the world does not. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Barnaby pulled Hannah close and kissed her with a joy that seemed to radiate from his very soul. The small congregation applauded, and for the first time since coming to Winnetka, Hannah felt like she truly belonged somewhere. They held a modest reception at their home, the front yard filled with tables laden with food that people had brought. It was not elaborate, but there was plenty, and the atmosphere was warm. Children ran between the hives, now comfortable in the space that had once frightened them. Women who had previously avoided Hannah now chatted with her about recipes and gardening, while men talked with Barnaby about the fur trade and hunting in the mountains. As the sun began to set and their guests departed, leaving them alone in the gathering darkness, Hannah leaned against her husband's broad chest and sighed contentedly. "Did you ever imagine your life would turn out like this?" she asked. "Never. I figured I would die alone in the mountains somewhere, probably fighting a bear or freezing in a blizzard." He kissed the top of her head. "This is so much better." That night, they came together as husband and wife with a tenderness that surprised them both. Barnaby was gentle despite his size and strength, treating Hannah like something precious. And she, who had been alone for so long, opened herself to him with complete trust. It was not just physical joining, but a melding of two solitary souls who had finally found their match. The following months passed in a haze of contentment. Barnaby continued to hunt and trap, but instead of spending months in the mountains, he made shorter trips, never staying away from Hannah for more than a week or two at a time. She continued her work with the bees, and together they expanded the operation, adding more hives and beginning to supply honey to towns as far away as Carson City. When spring arrived, bringing with it the explosion of wildflowers that fed the bees, Hannah realized she was pregnant. She told Barnaby one evening after dinner, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. She need not have worried. His whoop of joy could probably be heard all the way in town, and he swept her up in a careful embrace, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder filling his voice. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" "Hannah, I am more than happy. I am overwhelmed. I never thought I would have a family." He placed his large hand gently on her still flat stomach. "This child is going to be so loved." As her pregnancy progressed, Barnaby became almost comically protective. He insisted on doing all the heavy work around the property, barely letting her lift anything heavier than a honeycomb frame. He rode into town weekly to buy whatever she craved, coming back with unexpected items like pickles and peaches in syrup. At night, he talked to her growing belly, telling their unborn child about the mountains and the animals that lived there, promising to teach them how to track deer and identify edible plants. Hannah found his enthusiasm both touching and slightly exhausting. "Bear, women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am not made of glass. I know, but you are carrying the most important thing in the world to me. Let me fuss a little." She smiled and kissed him. "A little fussing I can handle." When her time came in late October, it was long and difficult. Barnaby sent for the midwife, a practical woman named Mrs. Henderson who had delivered half the babies in Winnetka. She shooed him out of the bedroom, but he refused to go far, pacing the front room like a caged mountain lion. Every time Hannah cried out, he flinched as though he had been struck. After nearly 20 hours of labor, a baby's wail finally pierced the air. Mrs. Henderson emerged from the bedroom, wiping her hands on her apron, a tired smile on her face. "You have a son, Mr. Kane. A big, healthy boy who clearly takes after his father." Barnaby rushed past her into the bedroom where Hannah lay exhausted but glowing, holding a wrapped bundle against her chest. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Look at him, Bear. Look at what we made." He sank down on the edge of the bed, his hands trembling as he touched the downy hair on his son's head. The baby was indeed large for a newborn, with a full head of dark hair and a set of lungs that suggested he would have no trouble making his presence known. "He is perfect," Barnaby whispered. "You are perfect. I do not have words for what I am feeling right now." "Then just feel it," Hannah said softly. "We have all the time in the world for words." They named him Thomas, after Hannah's father, and from the moment he entered the world, he seemed determined to explore every inch of it. As he grew, it became clear he had inherited his father's strength and his mother's curiosity. He took his first steps at 9 months, and by his first birthday, he was climbing everything he could reach. Life settled into a new rhythm. Barnaby still made occasional trips into the mountains, but they were brief and infrequent. His priority was his family, and he had discovered that being a husband and father fulfilled him in ways that solitary wandering never had. He taught Thomas about the wilderness, taking him on long walks through the desert, showing him how to identify animal tracks and read the weather in the clouds. Hannah continued her work with the bees, now with Thomas toddling along beside her. He showed no fear of the insects, much to his mother's delight, and seemed fascinated by the way they moved and worked. By the time he was 3, he could identify different types of bees and knew better than to disturb a hive unnecessarily. The children who had once been afraid to approach Hannah's property now brought their younger siblings to learn from her. She had become something of a local expert on native plants and pollination, and even some of the farmers who had dismissed her began seeking her advice on improving their crops. On a warm evening in June, when Thomas was nearly 4 years old, Hannah and Barnaby sat on their porch watching their son play in the yard. He was stalking a grasshopper with intense concentration, his small face serious. "I never thought I could be this happy," Hannah said quietly. "There were times before you came when I wondered if I should just leave, go somewhere else and start over. The loneliness was crushing." "What stopped you?" "Stubbornness, mostly. I did not want to let the fear and small-mindedness of others drive me away from something I had built. But also hope. Some small part of me believed that things could get better, even though I had no reason to believe it." Barnaby took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I am grateful for your stubbornness. If you had left, I would never have found you. Do you ever miss it?" "The mountains, the freedom to go wherever you want." "Sometimes," he admitted. "But not the way I thought I would. What I miss is the simplicity, the clarity of purpose. In the wilderness, things are straightforward. You hunt or you starve. You build a shelter or you freeze. You stay alert or you die." He squeezed her hand. "But what I have here is worth any amount of simplicity. You and Thomas give my life meaning in a way that survival never could." "You give me courage," Hannah said. "Before you, I had resigned myself to always being on the outside, always being the strange woman people avoided. You showed me that I deserve connection and love just as much as anyone else." Thomas chose that moment to run up to the porch, grasshopper cupped carefully in his hands. "Mama, Papa, look, I caught it." Hannah examined the insect with appropriate seriousness. "Very impressive, Thomas. Now what should you do with it?" He thought for a moment. "Let it go." "Why? Because it has work to do, like the bees." "Exactly right. Everything in nature has a purpose." Thomas opened his hands and they watched the grasshopper spring away, disappearing into the gathering darkness. He climbed onto Barnaby's lap, yawning widely. "Tell me a story, Papa." Barnaby launched into a tale about a young bear cub who got separated from his mother and had to find his way home through the mountains. It was a story he had told many times, with slight variations, and Thomas never tired of it. By the time the cub was reunited with his family, Thomas was fast asleep, his head heavy against Barnaby's chest. "I will take him to bed," Hannah said, reaching for their son. "Let me. You have been on your feet all day." He carried Thomas inside and tucked him into the small bed they had built together, brushing the hair back from his forehead. The love he felt for this child was almost painful in its intensity, a fierce protective instinct that would have driven him to any lengths to keep his family safe. When he returned to the porch, Hannah was standing at the railing, looking out at the hive silhouetted against the darkening sky. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against him. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am more than all right. I am complete." She turned in his arms. "Do you know what the best part is? We built this together. This is not your life that I joined or my life that you entered. This is our life, something entirely new that belongs to both of us." They stood there for a long time, holding each other while the stars emerged one by one overhead. The hum of the bees had quieted for the night, replaced by the chirping of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote. It was peaceful in a way that sank into the bones, the kind of peace that came from being exactly where you were supposed to be. 2 years later, Hannah gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose. She was smaller than Thomas had been, with her mother's dark eyes and a temperament that was noticeably calmer than her brother's. While Thomas was all action and energy, Rose was content to sit and observe, taking in the world with quiet intensity. Barnaby was, if possible, even more protective of his daughter than he had been of Hannah during her first pregnancy. He built a cradle with his own hands, carving delicate flowers into the wood. He hovered whenever anyone held her, as though expecting them to drop his precious daughter at any moment. "Bear, she is fine," Hannah said with amusement one afternoon when he checked on the sleeping baby for the third time in an hour. "She is just napping." "I know, I just want to make sure she is still breathing." "She is breathing. I promise you I would notice if she stopped." Thomas, now 6 years old, was fascinated by his little sister. He appointed himself her guardian, warning away the cats that sometimes wandered onto the property and insisting on being the one to fetch her blanket or bring her to Hannah when she cried. It was clear that he took his role as big brother very seriously. As the children grew, the family flourished. Barnaby had built a small addition onto the house, giving them more space. Hannah's honey business had expanded to the point where she was shipping jars as far as San Francisco, her reputation for quality spreading throughout the region. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. The town's attitude toward Hannah had undergone a complete transformation. The woman who had once been feared and avoided was now respected and valued. When someone had questions about gardening or beekeeping or any number of practical matters, they sought out Hannah Kane. The children who had once been warned to stay away from her property now flocked there after school, eager to learn and help with the hives. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Barnaby surprised Hannah by taking her up into the mountains for 3 days, leaving Thomas and Rose with Mrs. Henderson. It was the first time they had been completely alone since before Thomas was born, and Hannah had been nervous about leaving the children. But Barnaby insisted they needed this time together, and she finally agreed. He took her to a high meadow he had discovered years ago, a place where wildflowers grew in such profusion that the ground looked like a living quilt. They camped beneath the stars, making love with the passion of newlyweds, talking for hours about everything and nothing. "You remember the first day we met?" Hannah asked, lying with her head on his chest while he stroked her hair. "Of course." "You called me brave or foolish for approaching the hives. I thought you were the most interesting man I had ever seen. You were not afraid, not of the bees or of me. Everyone else kept their distance, but you just walked right up like it was the most natural thing in the world. You intrigued me, still do." He kissed the top of her head. "Every day I discover something new about you. After 10 years, I figure I will need at least another 50 to fully understand you." Hannah laughed and propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him. The firelight played across his features, illuminating the lines that time and weather had etched into his face. His hair was starting to show threads of gray at the temples, and there were scars on his arms and chest that told stories of his years in the wilderness. He was still powerfully built, his muscles honed by physical labor, and she loved every inch of him. "I love you," she said simply. "I know I do not say it enough, but I do. You saved me from a life of loneliness. You showed me that I was worthy of love. Hannah, you were always worthy. You just needed someone who could see it." He pulled her down for a long, deep kiss. and I am the lucky man who gets to spend his life with you." They returned home to find that Thomas and Rose had managed to get into all sorts of mischief in their absence, though nothing serious. Thomas had attempted to check one of the hives on his own and gotten stung 3 times for his trouble. Rose had convinced Mrs. Henderson to let her help bake cookies and had somehow gotten flour on every surface in the kitchen, including the ceiling. Despite the chaos, or perhaps because of it, the house felt fully alive. This was what family meant, Barnaby realized. Not perfection, but presence. Not the absence of problems, but the commitment to face them together. As the years continued to pass, the Kane family became an integral part of the community. Barnaby served on the town council for a while, though he found politics tedious and was relieved when his term ended. Hannah taught classes in beekeeping and herbalism, sharing knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. Thomas grew into a strong, capable young man who was as comfortable in the wilderness as his father, but also had his mother's scientific curiosity. Rose developed a talent for drawing, filling sketchbooks with detailed illustrations of bees and flowers and all the creatures that lived around their property. On an autumn evening when Thomas was 18 and Rose was 12, the family gathered for dinner as they did every night. It was a tradition Hannah and Barnaby had established early in their marriage, this time to sit together and talk about their days. No matter how busy they were, dinner was sacred. "I have been thinking," Thomas said as he reached for another piece of bread, "about heading up into the mountains for a few months. Papa, you have told me so many stories about trapping and living out there. I want to experience it for myself." Hannah's fork paused halfway to her mouth and Barnaby saw the worry flash across her face. But before she could speak, he squeezed her hand under the table. "That is a big undertaking," Barnaby said carefully. "The mountains are beautiful but unforgiving, especially for someone going alone." "I would not be alone. Jacob Miller wants to come with me. We have been planning it for months." "And you are just now mentioning it?" Hannah asked, unable to hide the hurt in her voice. "I wanted to be sure before I said anything. Mama, I know you worry, but I am 18. I need to do this." Thomas looked between his parents. "You both left your families to find your own path. Papa lived in the mountains for years. Mama, you came all the way from Missouri. I need to find out who I am away from here." Hannah was silent for a long moment, and Barnaby could see the struggle on her face. Finally, she sighed. "You are right. I do not like it, but you are right. Just promise me you will be careful, I promise." "And you will come back," Rose added quietly. "You have to come back." Thomas smiled at his little sister. "Of course I will come back. This is my home. I just need to see what else is out there first." After dinner, when the children had gone to bed, Hannah stood at the window looking out at the dark shapes of the hives. Barnaby came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist the way he had done countless times over the years. "He will be fine," he said softly. "You do not know that. So many things could happen." "You are right, I do not know that, but we raised him to be strong and capable and smart. We gave him the skills he needs to survive. Now we have to trust that it was enough." "When did our baby become a man?" "Gradually, and then all at once." He turned her to face him. "This is hard, I know, but it is also what we wanted for him. The freedom to choose his own path, to become whoever he is meant to be. I know. I just wish it did not hurt so much to let go." "That is love," Barnaby said. "It always hurts a little to watch them leave, even when you know it is right." Thomas left 2 weeks later, his horse packed with supplies and his face alight with excitement. The whole family stood in the yard to see him off, and there were tears and tight hugs and last-minute advice. As he rode away, waving until he disappeared from view, Hannah leaned against Barnaby and let herself cry. But life continued, as it always did. Rose threw herself into her studies and her art, determined to attend a school in San Francisco that specialized in illustration. The honey business continued to thrive, and Barnaby and Hannah learned to adjust to having one less person at the dinner table, trusting that Thomas would return when he was ready. He came back 8 months later, leaner and more weathered, but with a light in his eyes that spoke of hard-won wisdom. He had stories to tell that kept them up late into the night, tales of narrow escapes and breathtaking vistas, and the profound silence of winter in the mountains. But more importantly, he had found what he was looking for, a deeper understanding of himself and his place in the world. "The mountains were everything you said they would be, Papa," Thomas said, "but they also taught me something unexpected." "What is that?" "That as much as I loved being out there, I missed this more. I missed home. I missed all of you. The wilderness is part of who I am, but it is not all of who I am." He smiled. "I think I finally understand why you chose to stay here instead of going back into the mountains. It is not about giving up your freedom. It is about finding something worth more than freedom." Barnaby felt his throat tighten with emotion. "That is exactly right, son." Over the next few years, Thomas split his time between trapping expeditions and working the family property. He courted and eventually married a girl from town, a blacksmith's daughter named Sarah with a practical nature and a quick laugh. They built a house on the edge of Hannah and Barnaby's property, close enough to help but far enough to have their own space. Rose left for San Francisco when she was 17, her portfolio of drawings earning her a place at the California School of Design. It was harder than losing Thomas had been, because Rose was younger and the city felt more dangerous than the mountains. But she wrote every week, her letters full of excitement about what she was learning and the artists she was meeting. As their children built their own lives, Hannah and Barnaby found themselves returning to the quiet rhythms that had defined their early years together. They were older now, in their 50s, with gray in their hair and lines on their faces that spoke of years lived fully. But the love between them had only deepened, mellowed from the intense passion of youth into something richer and more complex. One afternoon, while working together to harvest honey, Hannah suddenly laughed. "What is funny?" Barnaby asked. "I was just thinking about that first day you came here. You were so serious, asking to buy honey like it was some kind of dangerous mission. It felt dangerous. Everyone in town had made you sound like some kind of fearsome witch. And instead you found a lonely woman who talked to bees. I found the woman I was going to marry, even though I did not know it yet." He set down the frame he was holding and pulled her close, not caring that they were both covered in honey and beeswax. "Best day of my life, meeting you. Even better than the day Thomas was born, or Rose. Those were different kinds of days. Equally important but different. The day I met you was the day my life began. Everything else followed from that." Hannah kissed him, tasting honey and sunshine. "I love you, Bear. Even after all these years, even when you track mud through the house and leave your tools everywhere and snore loud enough to wake the dead. And I love you, even when you get so focused on your bees that you forget about everything else, including meals. Even when you rearrange my things and insist on hanging herbs from every rafter in the house." They stood there, holding each other while the bees hummed around them, and felt the weight of years well lived. This was what happy endings looked like, not perfect or simple, but earned through commitment and compromise and choosing each other again and again. Rose returned from San Francisco after 3 years, having completed her studies, and gained a reputation as a talented scientific illustrator. She had been offered positions in the city, but chose to come home instead, setting up a studio on her parents' property where she worked on commissions, while also documenting the native plants and insects of the region. Thomas and Sarah had 2 children, a boy and a girl, who spent as much time at their grandparents' house as their own. Barnaby taught them to track animals and build fires, while Hannah showed them the mysteries of the hives. The children were never afraid of the bees, having grown up understanding that fear came from ignorance, and that respect was different from terror. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered for a celebration. Thomas and Sarah brought food. Rose created beautiful sketches to decorate the house, and the grandchildren presented Hannah and Barnaby with a book they had made, filled with drawings and stories about their favorite memories. As they sat around the table, 3 generations laughing and talking over each other, Barnaby looked at Hannah and saw tears glistening in her eyes. "Happy tears," she mouthed to him. He understood completely. This abundance of love, this noisy, chaotic, beautiful family, had sprung from 2 lonely people finding each other against all odds. The woman everyone had been afraid to approach, and the man who had seen past fear to the remarkable person beneath. They had built something that would outlast them both. Late that night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Hannah and Barnaby sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. The hives hummed softly in the darkness, a sound that had become as familiar as breathing. "You think we did right by them?" Hannah asked. "Thomas and Rose, I think we loved them and taught them and let them become themselves. That is all any parent can do. I worried so much when they were small, about whether I was a good mother, whether my own isolation and strangeness would damage them somehow. Hannah, look at them. They are happy and confident and kind. They know who they are and what they want. You gave them that." "We gave them that," she corrected. "Everything good in my life has been because you walked up to my door that day and were not afraid." "I was a little afraid," he admitted with a smile, "just not of the bees." "What were you afraid of?" "That I would say something stupid and you would send me away. That I would let the best thing that ever happened to me slip through my fingers because I did not know how to talk to a beautiful woman. You did fine." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "More than fine. You were exactly what I needed." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. The desert air was cool at night, carrying the scent of sage and distant water. Somewhere a night bird called and another answered. "I have been thinking," Barnaby said slowly, "about something Thomas said when he came back from the mountains." "What was that?" "About understanding why I chose to stay here instead of going back to my old life. How some things are worth more than freedom." He paused. "But the truth is, I did not give up my freedom when I married you. I claimed it. For the first time in my life, I was free to stop running, free to build something lasting, free to love without holding back." Hannah turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting starlight. "I spent so many years believing I was not meant to have this, that my nature, my differences, would always keep me separate from the kind of connection other people seem to take for granted. You proved me wrong." "We proved each other wrong," he said. "We were both convinced we were meant to be alone. And then we found each other and realized that being alone was not fate. It was just what we were waiting to end." She kissed him then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 25 years of shared history and the promise of whatever years remained to them. The months turned into years, and those years accumulated into a long and satisfying life. Barnaby's strength diminished gradually, age claiming what hard living had started, but his mind remained sharp, and his love for his family never wavered. Hannah's hair turned white as snow, and her hands became gnarled with arthritis, but she still tended her bees with the help of her grandchildren, passing on knowledge that had been handed down through generations. Thomas took over most of the physical work on the property, and Rose documented everything in beautiful sketches and detailed notes, creating a record that would preserve their family history. The grandchildren grew into capable young people who knew the value of hard work and the importance of being kind to creatures that could not defend themselves. One spring morning, when Barnaby was 72 years old, he woke before dawn as he always did. Hannah was still sleeping beside him, her breathing soft and steady. He lay there watching her in the growing light, marveling that after nearly 45 years of marriage, the sight of her still made his heart swell with love. He rose carefully, not wanting to wake her, and went outside. The world was just beginning to stir, the first bees emerging from the hives to start their daily work. He walked through the property they had built together, past the house they had expanded 3 times over the years, past the garden that fed them and the flowers that fed the bees. His body ached in ways that had become constant companions, but his heart was light. He thought about the young man he had been, wandering the mountains without purpose or direction, believing that solitude was the only life he was suited for. How wrong he had been. How grateful he was to have been wrong. Hannah found him sitting on a stump near the hives, watching the sun climb above the horizon. She brought him coffee and sat down on the ground beside him, leaning against his legs. "You were up early," she said. "Could not sleep. Too much to think about." "Good thoughts or bad thoughts, the best thoughts. I was remembering our life together, everything we have shared." Hannah reached up to take his hand. "We have been blessed, have we not? More than I ever thought possible." They sat together in silence, drinking their coffee and watching the bees begin their day. After all these years, words were often unnecessary. They understood each other in ways that went beyond language, a connection forged through decades of shared experiences, both joyful and difficult. When Barnaby died 5 years later, it was peacefully in his sleep, lying beside Hannah just as he had wanted. The funeral was attended by what seemed like the entire town of Winnetka and surrounding areas. He had become a respected elder, known for his fairness and wisdom, and his loss was felt by many. But it was Hannah who mourned him most deeply. For the first time in 47 years, she was truly alone again. Thomas and Rose tried to convince her to move in with one of them, but she refused. This was her home, the place she and Barnaby had built together, and she was not ready to leave it. She continued working with the bees, though at a slower pace. Her grandchildren and great-grandchildren visited often, keeping her from loneliness. And every evening she sat on the porch where she and Barnaby had spent so many hours, talking to him as though he were still there. "I miss you," she would say to the empty air. "The bed is too big without you. Food does not taste as good when I am not sharing it with you, but I am all right. We built something strong enough to support me even now that you are gone." 3 years after Barnaby's death, on a warm summer evening with the bees humming their eternal song, Hannah closed her eyes on the porch they had shared and did not open them again. She was 91 years old, and she went peacefully, a small smile on her lips as though she had seen something wonderful. Her children found her there in the morning, looking more at peace than they had seen her since their father died. They buried her next to Barnaby in the cemetery on the hill overlooking town, beneath a headstone that bore both their names and a simple inscription they had requested years before: "Together always." The property passed to Thomas, who maintained it with the same care his parents had shown. The honey business continued, now run by his daughter, who had inherited Hannah's gift for understanding bees. Rose's illustrated journals were eventually published, becoming a valuable resource for naturalists and beekeepers across the country. But the true legacy of Hannah and Barnaby Kane was not in property or business or books. It was in the way they had loved each other, fully and completely, through all the years they were given. It was in the courage they showed. The lonely woman who refused to let fear define her, and the mountain man who was not afraid to taste the honey she offered, both literal and metaphorical. Their story became part of local legend, told to children as an example of how love can transform lives. The house where they lived remained standing for many generations, and people would point it out to visitors. "That is where the beekeeper lived," they would say. "The one everyone was afraid of until the mountain man came and saw her for who she really was." And in a way, they were still there, in the hum of the bees that descended from Hannah's original hives, in the flowers that grew from seeds she had planted, in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their blood and their lessons forward into the future. The children were no longer afraid to approach. Instead, they came eagerly, learning and growing, understanding that what seems frightening from a distance often becomes beautiful up close. And they learned, too, that the bravest thing a person can do is not to face down physical danger, but to open their heart to love despite the risk of loss. Hannah had been the beekeeper the children were afraid to approach near. Barnaby had been the mountain man who was not afraid, who tasted her honey sweet and found it the most delicious thing he had ever known. Together, they had created a love story that endured long after they were gone, a testament to the power of seeing past fear to the extraordinary possibilities that wait on the other side. In the end, that was their greatest gift, showing that loneliness does not have to be permanent, that being different does not mean being unlovable, and that sometimes the person you need most walks into your life when you have almost given up hope. They proved that love, real and lasting love, is not about perfection or ease but about choosing each other day after day, year after year, building something together that neither could have created alone. Their story was complete, a life fully lived and fully loved, and though they were gone, the sweetness of what they had built together lingered on like honey on the tongue, impossible to forget and forever cherished by all who knew them.